Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of Historia Politica Publica. In the episode of today, we talk about the author Kwame Appiah and his book Lies That Bind. He's a political theorist specialized in identity, in culture, and the different categories that have been implemented in society in the last centuries and which are fundamental to shape our understanding of the world, same as our identity. For Appiah, the identity can be personal and collective. Personal means that you as an individual can be a charm, a wit, and intelligent person. And within the collective means that we are categorized by sex, ethnicity, religion, and so on. For Appiah, the idea of the self is an opposite to social conventionalism. In that sense, the self, the authenticity, is dialogically constituted, according to also Charles Taylor and other political theories. And in that sense, we as people tend to fight against the social conventions around us, such as the family, organized religion, society, school, the state. So we may think that we want to split our identity from those. However, the problem of that is that because we have been grown in a determined environment, we are being shaped by these ideas. We do make choice, of course. In that sense, we have free will, but we not determine the options among which we choose. In that sense, we can argue that even though we have free will, as we cannot have all the options available that we would like, the idea of free will, it can be more ambiguous in that sense. So for instance, if you have been raised in a kind of Catholic society, you will go more times to the church than to the other kind of religious buildings, such as the mosque or the synagogue and so on. And henceforth, even though when you are old and you declare yourself as a non-Christian, you will have been saved by the ideals among yourself. This is a kind of the social conditioning that is also being studied by many philosophers and political theories like Marx, Foucault, Hannah Arendt, and many others. In that sense, for Appiah, in his books, he analyzed that it is not only the words that we speak that make us part of an identity, but also other modes of expression. In that way, the arts, the gestures, the love, the way that we behave with each other in the daily kind of encounters, something that he called the habitus. In that sense, we as individuals we want to feel integrated in society and avoid discrimination. So we wish to express our identity and accommodate to the culture of the different society. Especially for an immigrant, when you go to another place, you want to not feel isolated, and you will try to understand normally how the people in that area behave, and perhaps you will follow their ideas. This can happen also in a kind of involuntary way, but just looking at your surroundings and so on, it's inevitable. Think about this. For example, if let's say that you are living in a country where you see that everybody is, let's say, taking a bike, like a city like Amsterdam, and the use of car is less popular than the bike. For instance, perhaps if you are living there for years, eventually you will take a bike and start to ride every day for go to the work, to meet with your friends, to travel and so on. Whereas if you are living in a city in which the public transport is negligent and everybody has a car, the car are cheap and so on, and you have an economic system that led you to buy a vehicle for yourself, probably you will do that. Cities like Los Angeles, in which the use of car is very common and so on. So these are kind of the conventions that even though you have a preconceived idea of what you would like to do, it is at the end the social environment that also shapes your decisions. In that sense, Anthony Appiah remarks the contradictions that are inherent in the main sources of identity. For that sense, he dismisses the identity as something without fundament, and yet he warns about its powerful influence. This is, I think, very important to understand the thought of Appiah, because for him, it is not that you want an identity and you have to fight for it, but it's the identity that other groups will impose on yourself, and sometimes you cannot do anything to change that. This is, for example, in the case of the Spanish exiles after the Civil War, how they were categorized as Reds, and even there were in Algeria, for example, many of them, they were categorized as communists, where you had people who consider themselves anarchists, Republicans, socialists, communists, and so on. And obviously this happened quite often with the refugees nowadays. They tend to be categorized in a kind of homogeneous community, but we can see how for example, the role of the stereotypes to define a particular nation. For example, if you say like the Italians, so they love pizza, the Spanish, they love to dance flamenco, the English people, they like to drink, and so on. So obviously you are making a generalization based on stereotypes that has been imposed on you by the media, by your college, by books that you may have read. However, this is not based on an empirical study, and in that sense, this identity can be it's very powerful, because it is also expected for you to behave in that way. So, for instance, if you are from a nation which is let's say it is believed that the people in those nations are very hardworking, are very smart, and so on. If you are from that nation, you will be expected to act in that way. So this is for that reason, Appiah concludes that identity is something which is not based on fundament, on empirical reasons, and yet it has a lot of power in how the people see you, but also in how yourself see you. I mean, it's obvious that Appiah has studied a lot Hegel, Marx, and this idea of dialectical materialism, and so on. How we, through our encounters, interaction with other people, we are developing our personalities, and obviously we affect other people in the manner that they see themselves. The book is very interesting, The Lies That Bind, because it is separated in 6 chapters. The chapters that I am going to talk now are classification, culture, and religion. You also have one which is called gender, one is called religion, and the other, I think it was called creed. Yeah, creed is the other. So creed is the same as religion. Sorry, the other, I don't remember the name, but basically each chapter covers a kind of subject which Appiah believes that all of them has been socially constructed for create identities. And you have culture as a social construct, or creed, same as gender. So, starting for the first chapter, which is called classification, first of all, I wanted to explain an example that Appiah also always gives. He's a Londoner. He's been born in London, but his fathers are from Ghana. So he has a black skin, and he always tells that when he was once, I think it was in New York, he took a taxi, and the driver asked him, "Where are you from?" And he replied, "I am from London." But the driver replied to him, "But where are you from originally?" And Appiah remembers that and says, what the driver was asking me is where this black skin came from. And at the end, he said, "Well, my fathers are from Ghana, but I am English because I've been in London." And this is also how the line of identity is very blurry, and for all the people who have been living abroad for a while, perhaps they have experimented that approach. We tend to have the conception that, for instance, the people in England are all the white people, but obviously this is far from true, because there are many people in England, in the whole UK, that they are descendants from people coming from the Caribbean, from India, for Africa, for many parts of the world. And even though these people are English because they have been born in British soil, they are considered by many people as foreigners, which is obviously an approach that has reminiscence of racism from many centuries before, and this is something, the kind of genealogy of identity that Appiah explores in this book. So, Appiah, in the chapter which is called Classification, he explores the modern concept of identity, which according to him it's developed after the Second World War, with a book called Childhood and Society, published in 1950 by Erik Erikson. This person was a psychologist who studied the life of Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi, among others. Also, there was a sociologist called Alvin Goldner in 1957, which points how social identity refers to the position which has been assigned to a particular person. Obviously, Appiah has drank a lot of these ideas. This was the social identity is a set of cultural prescribed categories. The individual is held to be a certain type of person, let's say a teacher, a woman, etc. These categories imply a different set of expectations, configurations of rights and obligations. As I mentioned with the example of the nation, if you came from a particular place, you are expecting to be from a kind of have a different personality and so on. If you are a teacher, perhaps you are expected to be more focused on some things. If you are a man, you have a kind of some preconceived ideas by the society. Let's say that the men are expected to behave more manly, to not cry, and so on. Appiah, for example, the political theories explain how when he was a kid, he got involved in a fight with another male, and after both of them were punished, but the professor told Appiah, listen, I'm going to punish him like 2 weeks and you just 1 week because you won the fight. So Appiah remembers that and say, okay, it is expected that because I was a man, I had to, it was important to win that fight. It was something like brave, courageous, something that has its origins in Odyssey of and Iliad of Homero. These ideas of the epic hero Achilles, of Odysseus, going towards dangers and always kind of surviving to the monsters or the sea or the gods or whatever they face in that sense. And this is how the road of the hero, which is many movies nowadays are based on that story. The adventures, the idea of survival, struggling, and so on are have been always categorized by the idea of man. And so in that sense, the essay of Ursula Le Guin, the career back, the theory of the back of fiction, it is very interesting to emphasize the role of women as how the literature has always focused on the idea of the man with their sharp weapons like the swords, like the knife, and so on, and how this has always relegated the woman to a second place. So, in that sense, the theory of Alvin Goldner about how identity is a set of cultural prescribed categories coincide with the social movement and the culture wars of the 1960s. Remember, civil rights movement in the USA, the wave of feminism, LGBTQ plus movement, the students' revolt, and so on, how the different groups coalesce in a kind of a wave of intersectional solidarity to have their own demands but also merge together in order to change society. In that sense, this was an important factor for the future, and there are many political theories that speak about French May, how this shaped the world. It was a huge class in the way that there were different demands that start to be more seen than before. In that sense, even though in those years the solidarity between different collectives, let's say, were not as close as today, but this was a marking point according to political theories like Noam Chomsky and many others. So going back to Appiah, every identity according to him comes with labels. Identities are important to people. This helps us to fit into the social world, and remember, for us, for everybody, it's important to feel integrated within society. They have a normative significance, following a specific kind of behavior instead another, like religion, culture. And that means that identity matters not just for spiritual or metaphysical or philosophical or theory approaches, but also for practical life. Identity in that sense can give other reasons to do things to you, basis of hierarchical structures of power. So obviously in the colonies, as Franz Fanon perfectly says in his book The Wretch of the Earth, you are black, you are poor because you are black, you are black because you are poor, and you are good because you are rich because you are white. So how these identities imposed on you by others have importance in your material life conditions, in how the others behave towards you, and so on. And this changes everything. For example, the black people in the USA, they were enslaved before, and after the emancipation, they still live in the areas where they were more noise, more contamination, and this is happening nowadays. So because you are black, you have less resources to achieve something in life. You will have more chance to get into prison, and so on. And this has happened in every society in the past, how a kind of hierarchy has served for great segregation. We have the system of apartheid in South Africa, in which the white population oppressed the black people in every kind of way of society, like in the geographical disposition of the city, the kind of capacity to have better jobs, to go to more prominent schools, and so on. Also, Appiah gives the example of the caste in South Asia, kind of dominant identities and subordinate identities, and how the struggle over identity, it has its kind of epitome in the social rights movement, when people challenge the assumption that led to unequal distribution of power, also in the anti-colonization movement, and so on. That says, Appiah also points to the difference between sex and gender. Sex is the biological situation, whereas gender is the whole set of ideas about how men and women should behave. The best political philosophical book about that probably is Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, in which she famously said that one does not born a woman, one becomes a woman, which in other words mean that it is the social convention, the conditions of our environment, the routine of every daily life, which have shaped our personality, and how the others have seen us since we are kids. The perfect example for understand that, it is the way that if you go to a house in Christmas or the birthday, you probably will see how a little girl, it is both a kind of, let's say, if you have little kid, you have a male and a female. Normally, the male will receive presents that are that they have like a football, or they have like toys which are more manly in theory, whereas the female will have a kind of dress, a kind of pinky toy, and some a kind of doll. So from the beginning, they are imposed how they have to behave in that way. I remember when I was a kid, I used to play with dolls that in theory will be for girls. I used to play with my cousin, she was a female, and so on. And I really love that, and I am grateful to my parents because they never say anything to me. They never look at me as if I was some kind of weird kid and so on. But normally that is not the case. And I was speaking with a friend how she was with the family, with another family, and she saw this in all its splendors in Christmas, how the kids were separated in that kind of symbolic but materialistic sense, obviously. Obviously with for example with football, the masculine and feminine, the competitions are now, the feminine are taking also more more importance. The women's football is having a great impact in many countries like Spain, UK, and many others, and so on. So the society is changing in that way, but still there is a lot to work on, and Appiah points to that thing. Identities involve labels and stereotypes, as I mentioned earlier, and in that sense, Appiah explains how we tend sometimes to use a distinctive accent to reflect distinction of social identity. This is obviously very clear when you go to another country and you feel that you do not speak the English, the language of the country perfect way, so you try to emphasize the accent to imitate themselves. And obviously for many of us who have been living in England for many years, this is something that we still do. in order to feel understood, and it's something that it's kind of difficult to avoid, because you want to be part of society, and sometimes in indirect ways you tend to emphasize your accent. I do not speak the same English when I am with my friends than when I am, let's say, in a kind of seminar of the university, or in a kind of official events in which I have to do a presentation. I try to, let's say, imitate more the British accent in order to feel more integrated within society. And even though I know that this is part of a social construct and is part of the identity that people are giving to me because I am considered an immigrant, a foreigner, Spanish and so on, it is really hard to avoid this idea. So all of that, it was exposed in the episode of classification. I want to speak about the others. For example, the chapter 6 is about culture, and he defines culture as, quote, that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired as a member of society. In that sense, he points many historical examples, such as the Europe. I spoke about that in the book on history of Eric Hobsbawm. But the thing is, like, he points how Herodotus, which is considered as the first historian, person who lived in the 5th century before Christ, and he covered the Persepolis War and so on. The War of the Peloponnesus, not the Persepolis. And did, in that sense, he used the word European as an adjective. So, in that sense, at that time, because it was kind of blurry to consider Europe as the continent, as Hobsbawm point, there was a time in the ancient Greece, which was the time in which Herodotus was living, that Greece involved 3 continents. Greece, there were part of it in Asia, there were part of it in Africa, and in the current Europe. So it was difficult to refer Europe to the geographical situation, and even later how, for example, Hobsbawm explained that after the Second World War, during the Cold War in US, the study of Europe did not involve the Soviet Union for obviously ideological reasons, and after the Soviet Union collapse, there was a study of Russia. So these also have ideological connotations, because Russia or Soviet Union before were part of Asia and Europe, same as Turkey now. They have Istanbul in Europe, but Ankara in Asia, also 2 capitals, and so on. In that sense, going back to history and to Herodotus, the first recorded use of the word European to refer a kind of person, but not as an adjective as Herodotus did before, it happened, according to Appiah, after the Battle of Tours between Muslims and the place that the France, it was not called France then, but the current territory of France, and it happened in the year 732 after Christ. So it happened 1,300 years before after Herodotus, and this was the first time that the word Europeans was recorded to refer a kind of person. In that sense, European, this was a battle between Muslims and the people who were living there, and the Europeans were used to define those Christians, people who were Christians in a kind of dichotomy against the Muslim. And this idea obviously was enhanced just 300 years later through the Crusades, from 1095 onwards. In that sense, obviously, Europe was used as a kind of label, an identity to define the people who supposedly were purer, were fighting for the right religion, having the just fight and so on, against the Muslims who were the invader from the south, from another continent. So the idea of Europe enmeshed not just the geographical area, but also the kind of people who were fighting at that time. But curiously, as Kwame and Anthony Appiah remind us, the ideas of philosophy which have involved our societies, even nowadays, came from pagan societies like the ancient Greece, the ancient Rome, current France with the secular society, and so on. And he points to that kind of a subject that they call the transfer of learning, how we currently took ideas from the ancient philosophy in order to learn currently and some from pagan societies, even though we are living in a Christian world, let's say, in the Western world, which is the hegemonic religion. So he points how from the late Middle Age through Hegel, the philosopher, until now, Greece and Rome are considered as European inheritance, even though what we consider Europe a kind of Christian society was not as much in the past. In fact, he points how we have shared learning with Muslim because the Arabs translate the Greek philosophy, and during the Dark Age in Europe, which I am saying Europe just to refer to the geographical situation, during the Dark Age that lasts almost 1,000 years, it was the Arab who rescued the documents from the ancient Greece and were able to translate the Greek philosophy to the Arab world, and how later on we benefit from that. Otherwise, probably we have lost forever the writings of Plato, Socrates, and many other important figures for the learning ourselves. So this meshing between the different religions, culture, something that has been important for our history, the political theories development, and so on. But obviously, the imposing on identities on others and ourselves have a great impact in how we behave nowadays. And I will finish here the episode, but I think I will do another more because there are many things to delve into Appiah's book, which is very interesting. I think it helps you to look the daily life in another way. I want to speak about his concept of routine, of the habitus, of the labels a bit more, and so on, the idea of the hierarchies and how he approaches this. He gives a lot of interviews. He's a kind of very accessible person participating in the public sphere, and so on, the idea of intersectionality and how the identities shape ourselves.